Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the No Silicast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever-so-slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, January 11th, 2026, and this is show number 1079. Well, this is our first show after the holidays and CES, and I gotta say, it's great to be back with a live audience. Everybody's showing me their dogs listening or sleeping through the show. Anyway, CES this year was pretty much just like every other recent CES. We drove out early so we could have breakfast with our dear friend, No Silicast and my wing woman in the live chat room, Sandy. Then we spent the next 3 evenings going to press events to get interviews for the show. Spent a lot of time with Dave Hamilton and Pilot Pete of the Mac Geek Gab, and Chuck Joyner and Norbert Frost of Mac Voices, and Bodie Grimm of the Kilowatt Podcast. We even got to have dinner with probably the sweetest man we know, JF Brissett, who has the joy of editing all of my Screencast Online videos. We even managed to spend some time going by the show floor in the Las Vegas Convention Center with 180,000 of our closest friends. In other words, it was exactly as awesome and fun as it's been for years. Now, if you haven't been listening for years, I should explain that Steve will be producing 2 or 3 video interviews every week and publishing them on our YouTube channel at podfeet.com/YouTube. The audio from these same interviews will be part of the No Silicast. Now, we don't want to inundate the audience with too much CES at once. Probably already tired of CES, so we're going to just string these interviews out over the first few months of the year. We have one really great one in this week's show, and it features Steve instead of me doing the interview. But I got to tell you, all the great camera work is all me. Now, speaking of CES, I had the great pleasure of being a guest on the Daily Tech News show during the show. Picture this: Tom Merritt, Rob Dunwood, Bodie Grimm, and me all at one tiny little rectangular table, and across from us is producer Anthony Lemos, also known as Amos, on the other side, and then Steve sitting in a chair next to him. All of this is in the tiniest little recording booth you've ever seen. It really gave me an appreciation for how hard the entire DTNS crew works and the complexity of what Amos manages in an offsite location with 4 cameras and mixers and microphones. I put a link in the show notes to the episode 5179 over at dailytechnewsshow.com, where you can watch for yourself. I dislike having to call AppleCare as much as the next nerd, but sometimes, you just have to. I have 3 stories to tell about recent AppleCare cases, all of which have happy endings. The first one starts out rough, but it gets there in the end. On October 16, 2025, Apple announced its first ever TV channel bundle where subscribers could get Apple TV and Peacock combined for a 30% discount. Now, if you were an Apple One subscriber, you could tack on Peacock Premium Plus, it's a lot of P's there, Peacock Premium Plus, for a 35% discount. This sounded swell to me because I was paying for Peacock Premium Plus already, as well as an Apple One subscription. On October 20th, the first day it was available, I went hunting for how to get the bundle with Apple One, but I couldn't find it. All I could find was the Apple TV Plus Peacock bundle options, not Apple One. Since I already pay for Apple TV through my Apple One subscription, that bundle would actually cost me more money. I decided that since this looked tricky to maneuver, I'd just ask Apple to help. The AppleCare specialist I talked to seemed to think this would be quite easy, but as we hunted around together from within the TV app on my Mac, iPhone, iPad, and Apple TV, neither of us could find the Apple One bundle. He advised me to click the buttons to get the Apple TV Peacock Premium Plus bundle, and hopefully the system would just sort itself out. Sadly, that did not work. I ended up paying for Apple TV One and Peacock Premium Plus standalone and the Apple TV Peacock Premium Plus bundle for an increase of $20 a month. We ended the call with the advisor requesting a refund for me for the Apple TV Peacock Premium Plus bundle, which came through within a few days. But through this effort, my Peacock Premium Plus was also canceled. That wasn't good, but for some reason, the bundle continued to work, so I didn't lose access to Peacock. I wondered what would happen when I got to November 20th, where the canceled bundle would also run out. Much to my surprise, on November 14th, 6 days before that canceled bundle was to run out, I got a new subscription bundle for $20 for Apple TV and Peacock Premium Plus. I also had an email saying the first one was running out on November 20th. I was frustrated because this meant yet another call to AppleCare, because now I'm paying twice again. The first advisor I spoke to was definitely not up to the challenge of working this problem. She kept making mistakes in her speech that you would let go if you were just talking to an acquaintance, but these mistakes could cause big problems later. I asked her to share my Mac screen because I had all of my receipts up in order to tell the story. Instead of connecting to my Mac, she sent the request to my phone. When I corrected her, she said she had connected to my iMac. Since I have a lot of Macs, I corrected her again. Then she mixed up Peacock with Paramount. That's an important distinction in this plot. After these 3 mistakes, I asked, hey, can you just give me second-tier support? The second person did seem to be more on the ball, but he couldn't figure out how to fix it. After reviewing all of my receipts and looking at the accounts through the Mac App Store, he asked if he could glean more info via the iPhone. Fine, let's do a screen share on iPhone. As he looked through my accounts there, he declared that I wasn't really being charged a whole new $20 a month for services I didn't want or need. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I suggested I look at my Apple Card statement via wallet to confirm I had no new $20 charge. I asked him to stop screen sharing on my phone so I could open Wallet, and he disconnected the call. Well, I was exhausted, and at this point, I didn't care about the 35% savings anymore, which was like $5 a month. I just wanted Peacock Premium Plus back the way it was. Now, I promised you this story had a happy ending. The next day, when I had higher energy levels, I climbed this hill to talk to my 4th advisor from Apple. RJ answered my call, and when I suggested I would need to be escalated immediately to a higher tier of support, he explained that he already is a senior advisor. He listened to my explanation of the tortured path I was on, and then began to read and study and mutter and ask me to hold and then mutter some more. The wheels were audibly turning in RJ's skilled brain. At 2 separate points in his muttering, I heard him say we'd probably have to send this to engineering. Those are the worst words to hear on an AppleCare call because sending a case to engineering often means you'll never get an answer. It's like being wished off into the cornfields in that Twilight Zone episode with Billy Mummy. So I'm not sure what he did other than cancel this new and unrequested bundle for Apple TV and Peacock Premium Plus, but after he did that, he told me to wait a full 48 hours and then try to subscribe to Peacock Premium Plus standalone. This was Wednesday the 19th we were talking, so it would be 2 p.m. on Friday the 21st that I would go back in and try to get back to where I was. On 7 p.m. on Thursday night, the day before that, we sat down to dinner and tried to play the series Suits from Peacock, and we were told we had no subscription to Peacock. So that was great. Obviously, things had proceeded faster than expected on the cancellation, but would I be able to order Peacock now? I opened my iPhone to the App Store, tapped on Peacock, and to my absolute delight, I saw the most beautiful words. Subscribe at a discounted price for $11 a month, which is $5 less than it was before all these shenanigans began. If we subtract out the cost of my time for over, 3 hours worth of AppleCare calls, I'm not sure it was worth $5 a month, but it's better than going through all of that and not getting the $5, right? Or paying the extra $20. And my lesson learned here is that I should have maybe let this deal go by for a month or so until the AppleCare folks knew how to trigger it properly. I'm guessing they would have told me to cancel my Peacock subscription first, wait for it to expire, and then see if the discount bundle was available. I'm choosing to declare this a success story, but all credit goes to RJ. Then a few weeks later, I got a subscription renewal notice. I couldn't believe it. I said some non-Girl Scout safe words and I hit cancel. A few days later, the image that was presented to me resurfaced in my mind, and I realized it had shown me a price of $11 a month, which is the discounted price. I couldn't believe it. I had actually canceled the good one. So I buried my head in the sand for a few weeks, and to my delight, Apple sent me an email telling me that my bundled pricing was going to expire. Would I like to renew it again? I jumped on that immediately, so I should be whole again. I think I'm not allowed to push any buttons that have anything to do with Peacock for at least a year. All right, that was story number 1. Story number 2. I am blessed with relatively dry fingers, and I mean blessed because it means that my phones and tablets don't get fingerprints on them like most people's do. The downside is sometimes Touch ID takes a few tries to function properly on my Macs. If it's particularly dry out, the problem is exacerbated, and I might even have to lick my finger to get Touch ID to work. When we were in Houston, Touch ID was only working intermittently on my MacBook Air. I eventually erased my fingerprint, and I set it up again, and then it worked properly. Till the next day, when it didn't work again. I erased it and set it up a second time, and the same thing happened. After the third time, I asked Steve to test his fingerprint we already had set up on my MacBook Air. When I asked him to test, I rotated the MacBook Air so it was aligned for his angle on my desk, and when he applied his fingerprint, the MacBook Air unlocked. I reached over and tried mine again, and it didn't work. Because of the angle, Steve essentially said, "You're holding it wrong." Well, I knew that wasn't the problem, but I rotated it back towards me, and dang it if my fingerprint didn't work to unlock the Mac. Don't you hate it when that happens? It worked when he was watching. But the next day, I was vindicated, but not in the way I wanted to be vindicated. I was working away on the MacBook Air when I got a pop-up menu that said, "Touch ID issue detected. There's an issue with your Mac's ability to use Touch ID. Go to settings for more information." In all my 41 years of using a Mac, this is the first time I've seen a hardware issue announced like this. I opened settings, and there was a new section highlighted called Parts and Service. I've only seen this once before, and it was when I was mind mapping system settings for macOS Tahoe. It's normally under System Settings, General, About. This section said Service History, and under that, Touch ID Board, and to the right, it said Issue with a chevron. When I selected the chevron, I got another delightful section entitled Touch ID Board, and under that it said, "Unable to determine if your Touch ID board is a genuine Apple part. This could be because the part is non-genuine or not functioning as expected." So, like I said, vindicated that Touch ID wasn't working properly and I wasn't just holding it wrong, but not exactly the way I'd hoped to be vindicated. Now here's where AppleCare comes into play. I called them to try to figure out my options. In my experience, shipping my advice to Apple from my home and having them mail it back to my house is the fastest turnaround method. My other option is to take it to an Apple store, but then I have to go back to the same store to pick it up, and it often takes longer. My new friend Luther on the phone and I discussed the issue after some reminiscing about how we both learned to type on old-fashioned Underwood typewriters. He suggested bringing it into the Apple store because a Touch ID replacement can be done in-house and while you wait. He said it'd only be a couple of hours. He said they'd have to replace the entire motherboard because it's far too difficult to remove Touch ID and not worth the trouble. I didn't doubt him, but I did find it hard to believe that my Apple store would fix anything while I waited. I was even surprised when he was able to get me an appointment within a day or so. That's normally not the case. Now, the first person that helped me at the table of sadness ran some diagnostics, I should say, and you know what happened, right? Yeah, Touch ID passed the test with flying colors. Now, he wasn't the tech who was supposed to be helping me, but he said the real tech would certainly have his hands tied being able to help me because the hardware passed the test. Senior tech Brian took over, and he was fantastic. He immediately said that just because it passed the test doesn't mean it's dandy. He said the screenshot I provided proved that Touch ID was failing. As we discussed, this isn't something that just kind of heals itself magically. I told him that Luther said I could get this fixed in a couple of hours, and he started giggling. He said Luther wasn't wrong, that the repair really does only take a couple of hours, but their backlog is 10 days. I am ever thankful that I have the luxury of owning 2 laptops, but if I didn't have that luxury, I would have contacted AppleCare again and sent this machine in from home. I'm telling you, it's way faster that way. He also told me that Luther was incorrect on another point. This replacement would not require replacing the motherboard or even the keyboard. For some reason, the heatsink would have to be replaced along with the Touch ID, but that was it. When I got the MacBook Air back, Touch ID worked again. I was patting myself on the back for paying for AppleCare, but this repair surprisingly only cost $177. That's something important to know. If your Touch ID stops working, it's a very inexpensive repair. When I put my receipt into Under My Roof, though, I discovered that I've already had the glass trackpad replaced by Apple too. I'd totally forgotten about that, so maybe I am ahead on the cost of AppleCare. Plus, you know how much fun I have torturing the agents on the phone. It's worth it. I have noticed something odd, though, and it's on both the MacBook Air and my MacBook Pro. I often simply can't rest my finger on Touch ID to have it recognized. I have to click the button. Not click it so hard that it brings up the login screen, sort of like a half click on a big curl camera where you slightly hold down the shutter button to set focus. But at least it works for now. Okay, that was the second story. The third anomaly I've been battling is that my MacBook Pro hasn't been getting updates from the Mac App Store. On my MacBook Air, whenever I check it, there seems to be at least a dozen apps asking to update. I don't check on a regular schedule, but Telegram has an update feature that reminds me to go look in the Mac App Store. Inside the app, it'll tell me if there's an update, and if I tap on it, it launches the Mac App Store for the update page for Telegram. Once I'm in there, I look for the rest of the updates and I get them done. Around the middle of November, I got the update notification from Telegram, tapped on it and tried to download the update from the Mac App Store on my MacBook Pro. The little circle went around 75%, then got stuck, and eventually told me it couldn't download the app. I've seen that from time to time lately on different apps. While it's annoying, it does seem to heal itself eventually. But the curious thing was that the update tab in the bottom left, again, this is on the MacBook Pro, it did not have a number on it, indicating the number of updates waiting. I figured I was on a roll with all of these successes, so I called AppleCare again. Senior Advisor Cliff was quite helpful as we walked through some steps, such as logging out of the App Store, not my Apple ID, just the App Store, but nothing we tried worked. He then discovered that the App Store was deregistered on my MacBook Pro. I have no clue what that meant, but Cliff said he could re-register it, and afterwards the updates would become visible, and more importantly, I'd be able to download them. I wish that was the end of my story. At the end of November, it happened again. When I talked to Nancy at AppleCare, she had me remove all of my login items, reboot, and then see if the App Store worked. That would disconnect our session, so I went off to do that on my own. My plan was that if it worked, I'd add back half of the login items, reboot, until I could figure out which app was somehow interacting with the Mac App Store. Before executing this maneuver, I documented all of my login items so I can easily put them back. But sadly, after removing them all and rebooting, the problem persisted. And it got even worse. Just clicking on the Updates button in the Mac App Store returned a pop-up that said, "Your request cannot be processed. Error code 5105. Next on the hit parade over at AppleCare was Alexis, who was possibly in the category of negative help. Even though I expressly told her this was a problem on my Mac, when she sent the request to screen share, she sent it to my phone. Told her to try it again, and she did. One of the first things they say at Apple when they screen share with you is that they'll pause the screen if any sensitive information is about to come up on screen, like a password. But Alexis wasn't quick on the draw, and as we went through the App Store account login information, she ended up seeing my Apple Card balance. I was annoyed with her, and she acted like, "Oh, it's no big deal. It's just your credit card balance." It's just like, no, I don't like this at all. I remained cross with her and insisted on a senior advisor. Priscilla was delightful and had other ideas. She thought maybe a VPN was causing it and had me delete both PIA and Tailscale. Still no joy. She also poked around in certificates and keychain access, looking for anything with a blue dot on it. I never found out what the significance of a blue dot would have been, but we didn't find any. We signed off without resolution, but Priscilla had not given up on me. She suggested disabling Touch ID, which didn't help. Then she suggested that I delete 2 folders from my home directory library caches. It was com.apple.appstore and com.apple.appstoreagent. Guess what? That fixed it. I signed off my response to her by saying it was a delight working with you. You were straightforward, to the point, no faffing about, and yet still polite and kind. I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving. And a day later, it happened again. I had the deadly, "Your request cannot be processed, error code 5105, again. I tried deleting the 2 cache files, but one of them was never recreated, and killing of the other one didn't fix it. I wrote back to Priscilla to tell her the bad news, and she said those words that you never want to hear: "I'm reaching out to engineering." So she sent my issue to the black hole from which nothing can escape. For 2 weeks, I begged the Mac App Store to let me have updates, but I was denied. And then, on December 12th, macOS 26.2 was released. And after the reboot, I checked the Mac App Store, and it worked. Now, it's not entirely bug-free in that it doesn't always show me the number of updates, but if I click on the update button, it takes me to the screen full of updates, and then the counter does show me the number of updates. More importantly, I can actually click to download each one of them successfully. Now, you may wonder why I included this issue in my happy AppleCare stories, even though the, hopefully, final solution was a macOS update. Even though that's true, Cliff did solve it temporarily by re-registering my Mac, and Priscilla also temporarily solved it by showing me the caches I could delete. They were both professional, intelligent, and resourceful, and that made me happy. The bottom line is that while calling AppleCare is often a futile exercise, whether the call is successful or not, it takes a lot of time. But I pay for AppleCare not just for hardware repair, but for the ability to get help when I can't figure something out. I do get my money's worth out of them in the long run. Remember how Steve and I had our house recarpeted right before Christmas and how I managed to make that into a tech story and our friend Norbert made fun of me for it? What I couldn't find a tech angle to was the story that happened right after that. The morning after the carpet folks finished, a pipe burst in the wall of our kitchen. The flood didn't get to the carpeting, thank goodness, but did go from a tiny internal leak inside the wall that we didn't know about to having one entire wall of our kitchen torn out and a week of construction workers, all right before Christmas. Small leaks lead to huge problems, and it's quite possible Bruce from Tennessee has found the solution.
Hi, this is Bruce from Tennessee with a review of the Moen Flow Smart Water Monitor. The problem to be solved is that both my church and a couple of friends had really bad experiences with water leaks that went on for days when nobody was around. I've also had the experience of the water company sending me a letter letting me know that something in my house was using water constantly over multiple days. Turns out the toilet was leaking, but it was about 2 weeks before the letter actually got to me. Fortunately, that leak was from the tank into the bowl, so no damage, just wasted water. But waiting for the water company to send me a letter just doesn't cut it for plumbing issues. So, a bit over a year ago, I decided I wanted something that could help me better monitor water usage and automatically shut the water off if there was a problem. After some research, I picked the Moen Flow Smart Water Monitor. The specific one that I got for 1-inch pipes is currently about $550 from mail order and hardware retailers. The one we installed at my church was quite a bit more expensive, but it's for much larger pipes. Now, that $550 doesn't include installation. If you're comfortable doing home plumbing, it could be a do-it-yourself, but I've done some plumbing work, and messing with the main water line is just outside of my comfort zone. I was already going to have a plumber come to do some other work, so I had them install the valve as part of that operation. There is a subscription service that you can sign up for, but I've chosen to not do that. A photo in the blog post shows the valve as installed on our main water line just after the pressure reducing valve. The location does have to have power and decent Wi-Fi. Fortunately, we did have a good spot for that in our garage. The sensor also includes an app that installs from your app store. It requires creating an account with Moen, but it's been easy to opt out of getting marketing emails. At this point, the only emails I get from Moen are the weekly water usage reports and emails about alerts. So after the installation, you give the app information about whether you have big water use items like an irrigation system or a pool. After that, the sensor goes into a learning mode where it just observes over a couple of weeks. Once that learning period is done, the app will send alerts if it thinks there's unusual water flow. It can alert by any combination of push notifications, SMS, and email. For the more serious alerts, the valve will shut the water off after 5 minutes if nothing causing that alert changes or you don't cancel the alert. I had a few false alarms at the start, primarily due to the water softener recharging the resin tank. That happens at night and only every few weeks for us, with the exact interval depending on how much water we use. So there's a place in the app for custom rules for things to not alert on. It took a couple of tries, along with some good email assistance from Moen technical support, but I do now have a rule in place so that the sensor doesn't alert when my water softener recharges. The monitor tests for leaks by turning the water off for a couple of minutes in the middle of the night and then looking at the pressure drop. If that pressure drops significantly, there's a leak someplace. And as it turns out, mine started alerting to a small leak shortly after installation. It took some detective work to sort out that the leak was in a garden faucet where the supply line connects to it about 2 feet below ground, so there was some dirt moving involved to fix that. By taking photos of the water meter reading over about a half an hour when nothing was using water, just that leak happening, I was able to determine that the leak was about a quart of water per day. Now, this is a pretty sensitive leak detection. When we're going to be going for vacation, I put the sensor into away mode, which makes it much more sensitive to leaks and unusual water flows. I do have a drip irrigation system in my garden, and I leave that on when we're out of town during the growing season. So I also had to set up some rules to cover that water usage when we're gone. That was a bit easier to deal with than with the water sensor, as I know the times when the irrigation system kicks on. I'll tease a future review by saying that I'm using Ratio smart water valves, and they're tied into the ambient weather station I have in the backyard. So the irrigation system automatically adjusts for past and forecasted rainfall. The Moen flow sensor has some algorithms that tell you how much water is being used for showers, toilets, appliances, and so on. The numbers fluctuate some, which is to be expected. We've had some family in town recently, and I've been doing a lot of cooking, so the water usage is up a bit. When I look over a 7-day period of time, our usage patterns for showers, toilets, appliances, and faucets seem reasonable to me. I can also look into the history list and see, for example, how much water I used in the shower I took earlier today, or how much water I used in cleaning up the kitchen this evening. There also are some graphs and tables available for daily, weekly, and monthly total household water usage. Overall, I'm quite happy with the device and with the support I've gotten from Moen. So, I hope you found this interesting. Peace, and may you find beauty in the world around you.
Last year, right around Christmas, our beloved niece passed away. As you can imagine, it's been a really rough year, especially for her parents. They're healing, but it's pain that will never truly go away. When we were visiting over the holidays this year, her mom showed me that they have her iPhone and they can't bring themselves to turn it off and discontinue paying for the phone service. They pick it up from time to time and scroll through photos and texts in hope of feeling closer to her and maybe understanding what happened in her life. You may have thoughts and opinions on whether this is an invasion of her privacy, but I suggest that we not be judgmental if we haven't lived through the most awful loss possible. I thought maybe I could be of some help to them because I had an idea of how to pull the data off of her phone so that at least they could stop paying for the service. I decided to see if the longtime and well-trusted Mac Windows app iMazing could do the job. iMazing is from Swedish independent software developer DTNS Sarl, and it's available at imazing.com. iMazing was originally called Disk Aid back in 2008, and in 2014 it was rebranded as iMazing, so it's really been around for a very long time. iMazing is a very powerful and deep app, but I'm going to focus mostly on how it solved this one problem. Before I start on the solution, though, let's talk briefly about its overall capabilities and the company's license model. With iMazing, you can schedule local backups with snapshots of your phone, backup to custom locations such as external drives, export messages with metadata, copy music and videos from and to your iOS devices, manage files on your iOS device just as though it's an external drive, manage configuration profiles, store no longer supported iOS apps and reinstall them on a new device, and a whole lot more. All of the transfers of data and backups are local on your machine, never sending any of the data to someone else's cloud service. Now, their license model is interesting. It's a subscription for $60 a year and allows you to install it on any number of Macs and Windows machines, but you're limited to accessing just 5 iOS devices. They're very clear when you sign up that you'll be renewed in 1 year, and I interpreted that as, don't forget to cancel because we're going to auto-renew. I don't know if that's true, but that's the way I read it. Since I only needed this application for this one task, I paid the $60 and I immediately canceled the subscription. I could still get to use it for a year, and if I end up liking some of the other features, I can always renew it when it comes close to its expiration date, but at least I'm guaranteed it won't auto-renew. I looked at this as a one-time payment of $60 to extract information from her phone. Now, there's some features that are available without paying for the subscription. I was kind of hoping to tell you about that, but I was unable to find a comparison list between free and paid. For example, I'm pretty sure you can run backups locally without paying, but don't hold me to that because I could not find proof of it. Now, let's get into the specific problem to be solved with our niece's phone. One of iMazing's superpowers is that it can extract everything from an iOS device, either as a backup or in a more human-readable format. I plugged your phone in and I got a very pretty interface in iMazing. On the Overview tab, I could see lots of information about her device, down to the serial number and an explanation of her storage use by category, photos, audiobooks, etc. Across the top was a row of buttons for photos, music, messages, and more. From these buttons, you can directly access the apps on the phone and either export data from the phone or import data to the phone. For example, if you choose Photos, you can see the entire Photos library, including all albums and media types, and export or import photos and videos. Down the right side was a list of quick actions, such as quick transfer, backup, and manage apps. My first instinct was to run a backup. While that seemed like a good idea, after I completed the backups, I realized this wasn't a format that would allow us to access the contents. It's not the worst thing in the world to have, but it's not the final solution. The next option I tried was export all data, and that was where things got really interesting. I got a list of categories I could choose to export. I disabled the options for impersonal things like books and music and let it run the export on the rest of the categories. When it was complete, I had folders for calendar, contacts, messages, notes, photos, voicemail, and WhatsApp. I'd like to talk through the value of each of these folders and kind of how they're structured. The calendars folder contained several subfolders: iCloud, other, reminders, and subscribe calendars. Inside each of those folders were more subfolders. For example, inside iCloud, I found calendar, home, and work. I imagine every named folder would be a separate subfolder in here. Drilling down in any of those named calendar subfolders reveals 3 different types of files that are all exports of that same calendar. You get a comma-separated values format, a .csv, an Excel file, .xlsx, and a .ics file, and that's something you could import into another calendar application. I'm not sure the calendar events in a list would provide her parents with any comfort, but it will allow them to walk through her life over the decade or so she had her phone. Now, contacts works pretty similarly to calendars. There are subfolders for all contacts, iCloud, and unknown, and subfolders within those. Drilling down all the way revealed .csv and .xls files with all of her contacts' information, and that could be useful to her parents. It also included a .vcf file, which can then be imported into another contacts application. I'd never heard of that before, but .vcf is to contacts as .ics is to calendars. Now, messages are definitely an area where they may get insights into her life, but it's also so massive that it's going to be hard to be useful. Messages also have subfolders, and each subfolder is a conversation with a different person or group of people. The folder's names start with a date, which is nice for sorting, followed by a timestamp, and then some words or word to identify the conversation. I never figured out how the name was created, but it does help to identify the conversation. I couldn't resist the temptation to peek inside the conversation folder entitled Fart, F.A.R.T. To my great chagrin, it was a work conversation that had zero information on flatulence. It's all about work. Jeez. Inside each message thread folder, you get several interesting ways to understand the message. Probably the most useful is a PDF. That gives you the entire conversation formatted just like a message thread, with little text bubbles and embedded thumbnails of any images. You also get a plain text file that has just the messages with timestamps and who the message was from, along with their phone number. There are even Excel and CSV versions of that same information. But perhaps of most interest to her parents is that every single image, video, and GIF that was in the message thread is also in this same folder in full size. I'll get back to this in a bit, but think about drilling down into each of these folders one by one to see if any of the photos are interesting and ones you'd like to keep. She had 1,082 separate message conversations saved on her phone, so 1,082 separate folders to drill down into one by one to see the images. I needed to find a solution to make that easier for them. The notes folder is probably the simplest. It simply contains plain text files for each note, and if there are any embedded images, they're in a folder with the same title sorted next to the file. The photos folder contains separate folders of photos and videos for every day there was a media file captured. Now, if you thought messages would be annoying to go through, the expert from her phone had 5,823 folders containing images and videos. Again, this is untenable as a way to view photos, so this one needs a solution too. My niece also kept a lot of voicemails. At first, her parents were pleased that they'd be able to hear these, but then they realized they wouldn't be hearing her voice. It would be the voice of others leaving voicemails for her. These are not buried in folders. They're simply in order by date and time with the name of who left the message. The recordings are .amr files, which is a compressed audio format called adaptive multirate, and it's easily playable with QuickTime. Finally, she had that WhatsApp folder. I imagine you'd have one for whatever messaging apps you use. Like Apple Messages, her WhatsApp folder had subfolders containing a PDF and the 3 text file formats .csv, .txt, and .xlsx. As it turns out, she wasn't a big WhatsApp user, so there weren't any photos in that folder. Now that we understand the folder structures, let's talk about how to reorganize both the photos and messages folders to make it easier for them to comb through the image and video files. Remember, there are literally thousands of folders with buried images and videos. As much as I love this family, I wasn't willing to do any of this by hand, but instead decided to write a script to reorganize the data. But first, I had to do some reorganization on my own laptop because I'd made a rather strategic error. I'd downloaded not just the backup, but also the folder structure to my desktop. And I sync documents in desktop through the cloud. I didn't check the backup size before tossing it, but the export alone was around 30 gigabytes. Have you ever noticed lately it's kind of hard to find a place on your Mac that isn't synced through some service? I settled on my downloads folder, which is not synced. Now, the goal of my script was to move all of the photos and videos into two folders, just a flat folder structure, just a folder with all the photos and videos together. So I needed one for the Photos app and one for her Messages app. I wanted them copied to those two folders without any of that subfolder structure, and I wanted the original capture dates of the images to be maintained so they would sort properly. I used that goal as a prompt in Perplexity to help me write a shell script that would work on macOS 26. The resulting script was only 29 lines long. In my original prompt, I forgot to tell it to preserve the original capture dates, but when I asked it to do that, it said, "Oh, I already did that for you. This is the step here where I did that." Now, it also added file extensions to look for well beyond what I would have thought of if I'd tried to be specific. For example, it said it was going to look for TIFF, AVI, and MKV. It also put in a step to check if a file of the same name already existed, and if so, it would add a counter to the file name. I put the teeny script into the show notes if you're interested in reading it. While I understood the basic gist of what the script was going to do, I'll confess that I didn't break down every single command to understand every element. But since I'm not an idiot, I created a couple of test directories with sample data from her phone, and I ran the script on that data first to see if it worked properly. After I ran the script on the test data, I checked to ensure that all of the images copied over to the destination directory were as individual files without folders, and I double-checked that the file creation dates had been preserved. Once satisfied that it was working properly and not destroying the original source data, I ran it on the Photos folder export from my Amazing, and it copied 35,000 photos and videos in short order. It was easy to modify the script to run again on the Messages folder because Perplexity wrote the script with a variable at the beginning for the source and destination directories, and it would create the destination directory for me. I only had to switch the source to Messages, name a new destination, and it moved over another 12,000 photos and videos to the second directory. When I was done, I had two flat directories filled with images they could easily flip through, delete the ones I didn't want, and save the precious memories that would give them comfort. I have to say I was rather chuffed after this success. Now it was time to move the files to her mother's Mac. Like most of you, when Steve and I go to see family, we expect to do a lot of tech support. Steve's parents are very diligent about applying security updates to their devices, but we like to be the ones to do major OS upgrades just in case something goes wonky or if they have trouble understanding a new interface. We had planned to install Tahoe on both of their Macs over the holiday. Now, in the past, we both downloaded the installer from system settings while at his parents' home, which meant we were competing for bandwidth on the same network. This year, I decided to be smarter. I made a couple of bootable installers before we left home to speed things up when we arrived at their house. I formatted two SSDs as macOS Extended Journaled and followed Apple's instructions on how to download and install macOS. They really want you to use the Mac App Store to download, but that only works if you're not downloading the current version of macOS. If you need the current version, you'll be using the terminal to do the download. Luckily, I've taken the Taming the Terminal course, so I was not afraid. The command Apple provides fetches the full installer and moves it to your applications directory just as though you downloaded it from system settings. You provide the full installer version number for the download, so I was able to specify macOS 26.2 and not have to do an update right after they got it. Once downloaded, you follow another Apple support article to create a bootable installer for macOS, which also uses the terminal. This command creates the installer on your removable media. Now, I only needed to download macOS 26.2 one time, and then I could easily make bootable installers on the two drives we'd take with us to upgrade the two Macs we'd be upgrading. You might be wondering why I'm throwing all this stuff in about bootable installers when the story was about moving our niece's data off of her phone and then off of my Mac to their Mac. The bootable installer only needs a 32 gigabyte thumb drive, but we didn't have any thumb drives that big. Instead, I used two spare 1 terabyte SSDs we had on hand. This was good news for the rest of the story. We had updated Steve's parents' Macs, and shockingly, neither of them were bothered at all by liquid glass. I'd been dreading imposing it on them, but they didn't bat an eyelash at it. While we were working on the OS update, we discovered that his dad's Mac hadn't been backed up in a year and a half. While his mom used his time machine, his dad had always run his own backups using a thumb drive, since he didn't have a lot of data. We all know how it works out when we think we'll do manual backups, right? Anyway, after doing the macOS Tahoe install on his Mac, we decided to sacrifice one of our 1 gigabyte SSDs to the cause. We reformatted the drive again, this time to APFS, and turned it into a time machine drive for him. I'm sure the drive will be very happy living there. Now we move back to our hero at Steve's sister's house. She asked me to update her to macOS Tahoe 2. No problem, we've got the second SSD with the installer, and I quickly updated her computer. Finally, we're back to where I needed to move the data from my Mac over to hers for her daughter's phone. Time to reformat that installer drive to APFS. At this point, I've got the 2 nice flat folders of photos and videos, but I wanted to give her the entire export just in case there was more she needed. I put the 2 folders and the entire export onto the SSD, and I moved it over to her Mac. You would think I would have learned after putting all of this data in a location synced over iCloud on my Mac, but I did it again this time to her Mac. She only has a 256 gig internal drive on her iMac, and all of this data was whooshing over the internets to her MacBook Air. Luckily, she had 200 gigabytes of iCloud, so nothing broke, but I was close to hitting her limit. The only reason it worked was that her iCloud settings on her Mac were just optimized files. I wanted her to have the originals locally, getting backed up, so I changed her preferences in iCloud to originals for documents and desktop syncing on her iMac. And then I realized after doing all this to her, she only had 30 gigabytes left on her Mac. Now, I certainly wasn't going to go through tens of thousands of images and videos to delete duplicates after all this work, but I did decide to delete some of them. Remember, I can't really delete them the way they are in the other folder structure because they have those text files that they may want. So I needed to figure out how to get some of the videos out that would get rid of the most data. In her messages folder in the full export, the one with photos, videos, and text files for messages buried in folders, I sorted by folder size. You can do that by going to View, Show View Options, or pressing Command J, and then checking the box to calculate all sizes, and that'll calculate the size of the folders. Then you can sort by size. Now that I could see the top folders by size, I was able to navigate down into them and delete any photos and videos in just those folders. Remember, she's got all of these photos and videos in the flat folder and 47,000 media files to comb through. I didn't think she'd miss just a few of these duplicates. Doing this purge through just the top 7 message folders increased her available storage from 30 gigabytes to 65 gigabytes. When next we visit, I'll help her clear out the duplicates, but at that point, I wanted to get back to playing shuffleboard and card games and hearing all of the family stories. This story is hard to do a bottom line on because nothing I could do would take away any of their pain. But in my own nerdy way, I was able to help them to preserve these memories of their daughter and save them the cost of paying for a stupid cell phone plan indefinitely. I learned a lot, and I'm glad iMazing was there to help me with this work. This week, we have 2 heroes who chose to support the show with their hard-earned dollars. This comes at a really good time as funding the coverage from CES is very expensive, even though we drive ourselves there in an electric vehicle. Hotel prices are crazy high during CES. Anyway, FlyLow1970 went to podfeet.com/donate and bought me some coffees. And then Kenneth Kleinman went to his tool of choice, podfeet.com/PayPal, to make a very generous donation as well. I can't thank both of these fine gentlemen enough for showing their appreciation of the work we do here at the Podfeet Podcast. And now I'm going to hand the microphone over to Steve for his interview at CES.
I'm here with Marco Letamaki at the Donut Labs booth. And I heard an announcement yesterday by your company that was just fantastic. And I'm very interested in your technology. So I'd like, if you don't mind, for you to explain a little bit and how it works when incorporated into this Verge motorcycle.
Sure. Yeah, so Verge TS Pro uses already our motors here. So it's an in-wheel motor. It's a rim motor, what we say, how we call it.
I've also heard the term hubless.
Yeah, it's hubless rim motor. So it's normally you have in-wheel motors in the hub. This is, in the rim. And that gives so much more power and torque to the motor because the materials are on a larger radius. And so this motor right here produces 1,000 newton meters torque.
Newton meters?
Yeah.
Okay.
And up to 200 horsepower in our Ultra model.
In a relatively small machine, that's a lot of horse. Can I ask a couple questions about how this is implemented? So the point of rotation is between this and this?
Yeah, so stationary part is here. And then the
rotating part is this?
Exactly, yes.
So, and now, is there any physical point of contact between those two pieces, or is it magnetically separated?
Yeah, it's magnetically separated.
So there's no physical friction. There's magnetic friction, but no physical friction.
Yeah.
Which also helps with performance,
absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And so this is an extremely efficient design, I would say. Plus instant torque and high power.
Yeah, I mean, so this is approximately 3 times more torque and power than the per kilogram. So power density and torque density versus the next best motor in the world. So it's
on a motorcycle?
No, period. Like anywhere. Yeah.
Impressive. Okay.
Yeah.
So I see these 3 large electrical cables coming in. They're providing electricity to the motor.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and so the battery is up front here?
Yeah, battery is this whole bottom part of the vehicle. So you don't need to make space for motor and everything because the motor is in the wheel. So we can use the entire space for battery.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about the battery technology?
Sure. Yeah.
How many kilowatt hours does that battery store?
There's 2 variants. There's this variant that is 20 kilowatt hours, and then there's a 33.3 kilowatt hour variant that was announced just yesterday, which is 350 miles
of range.
Yes.
On a single charge.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Solid state battery?
Well, yes. I mean, this is officially the world's first vehicle shipping to customers that has solid state battery in it. And that allows us not just to give almost double the range that was Verge broke the Guinness World Record last year with the longest range on a motorcycle. Now they are almost doubling it thanks to our solid state battery. But also that provides Verge bikes with less than 10-minute charge time, 0 to full, versus the industry-leading 35 minutes that it used to be before, which was already way more than the competitors. Now it's down to less than 10 minutes. And on top of that, the cycle life that is normally in cars maybe 2,000, 3,000 cycles, this is 100,000 cycles. So that's like probably 30 lifetimes of a motorcycle. So you never have to worry about babying the battery or worrying if you can let it go to 100% or 0. It doesn't mind. You can do whatever you want, charge it to full, let it go to 0 as many times as you want. It doesn't degrade.
This is very impressive. Let me ask a couple practical questions and then get into battery tech. Practical questions. When you charge, what are you charging from or on?
Yeah, it's an ACS in the US.
So. An ACS, like you can go to a Tesla charger?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And it will accept a charge from a Tesla charger?
Yes, absolutely.
Got it. And so what is the max rate it will charge in kilowatts?
I think it's somewhere around 200.
200 kilowatts. Okay, that's like a Tesla.
10C, yeah. That's 10C. That with that rate, you go below 10 minutes. Yeah.
That is impressive. Okay. Now, the battery technology is solid state.
Yes.
And you've announced some power densities that are incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not just, I mean, so if I run through the specs quickly, we have 400 watt hours per kilogram. We have full charge on the cell level, we can get to 5 minutes. So then it depends on the cooling and everything in the battery pack, whether you get to 5 or 10 or whatever. But 5 minutes is the fastest charge possibility. As mentioned, 100,000 cycles. So that's 10 lifetimes of a car as well. And the other incredible things are that, of course, with motorcycles, you don't take them to like deep freeze or anything. But if you're using these batteries in cars, even at like 25 or 30 minus Fahrenheit, it will have 99% of capacity.
Even so, the reason you can do that is there's no liquid in the battery. It's solid state.
Yeah, so 200 Fahrenheit to minus 30 Fahrenheit, it's 99 point something capacity.
That is impressive. So, do you have to precondition the battery like a car might?
Not at all. And actually, what we've done even is that normally you cannot get lithium-ion batteries to 0. Like
Right. We know
right?
about that. 5% is the lowest we like to go.
Yeah. This can go 0.0.
And the battery doesn't get damaged.
No, then you can go with 5C charging from the next moment without warming it up or anything. It just takes it like nothing.
Wow. So,
Yeah, absolutely, to 100%.
and that does not harm the battery for consistent charging to
it's
100%.
100,000 cycles with that. Yeah.
So that's the difference also between lithium ion and other technologies in solid state?
Not with all solid state, but with ours, yes.
And can you say a little more about your solid state technology, or is it all proprietary? What makes it so special?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. So,
Okay.
this
podcast is not worth it.
So no, we're not sharing about the chemistry. We do have our trade secrets about the manufacturing techniques as well as the materials. Of course, obviously, some will soon. When they get one of these into their hands, they will sweep and do some analysis and everything. But that can happen then. But right now, we've decided, we are the first. We are moving fast. We don't want to share all of our trade secrets to all the competitors immediately.
I fully understand that and appreciate that. So So with this really high power density and the solid state technology, can you talk about the safety of these batteries relative to others in industry?
Yeah, that's the other thing that so there's no risk of thermal runaway, so it won't ignite. I mean, even if you shoot through it or do whatever you want to the cell, it will be just fine. It just loses the capacity from the area where you shot. But yeah, so there's no risk, and that's actually a huge thing. For not just for automotive, but we also putting these into grid storage and charging stations and all those, energy storage places. So
whole home batteries?
Absolutely, yeah. This is going into all kinds of places now. So they're not having to worry that it will catch fire is a huge thing.
Fantastic. So we see this implemented on a motorcycle, and you're working with Verge to do that.
Yeah.
Other vehicles right now that you're working?
Well, actually, Watt Electric, they provide this skateboard platform to 100 plus OEMs already. They do commercial vehicles, sports cars, or it's a modular skateboard platform for car manufacturers. It comes now with donut motors and the solid state battery since today. So any of the customers of Watt that wants to utilize this technology, they can do a drop-in replacement to their existing cars.
Got it. Fantastic. So it sounds like your goal is to get into as many platforms and other uses as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it seems we cannot help it because last year we announced this incredible motor family, and we got like 500 OEMs talk to us throughout the show, 5 days. Now, before we started today at 9 a.m., before the show even started, we had over 1,000 OEMs that had reached out to us already since yesterday's announcement. So it is going literally to data grids, balancing, to charging stations, to marine, to drones, to everywhere. And we're happy to do business with everybody.
I love to see this kind of technology proliferate, and I'm glad you guys are out front. Is there any question I didn't ask that you'd like to get information out about your product? Or
maybe capacity, because a lot of people wonder, like, okay, when can you go to big scale or whatever? So we are already at gigawatt hour level. We are going to tens of gigawatt hours next year. And if any large OEM needs even more capacity, we can ramp up. And there's no basically ceiling to our ability to ramp up. So the bigger the project, the happier we are. So we're happy to work with everybody.
Fantastic. Marco, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate the time you spent with me today, and good luck. All the best with this. I'd like to see you succeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for doing that, Steve. You did such a great job. Steve just grabbed the mic and went, "Yeah, I got this," and goes running out there. I was like, okay. I had a little more trouble doing the recording of the video, and I have to confess, I almost erased the entire recording, which would have been really bad. Anyway, we do want to point out that most people are really skeptical about these rather outlandish claims, so we'll all have to wait to see if it's real or vaporware, but we're kind of hoping it's real. But that's going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeet.com anytime you like? If you have a question or suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeet.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeet.com/Mastodon. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube or go see Steve's interview, you can go to podfeet.com/YouTube. If you want to join the conversation, you can join our Slack community at podfeet.com/Slack. And in there, you can talk to me and all the other lovely No Silicastaways. You can support the show at podfeet.com/Patreon or the one-time donation at podfeet.com/donate, like Flyload1970 with Apple Pay or any credit card. Or you can use PayPal at podfeet.com/PayPal, like Kenneth Kleinman. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, head on over to podfeet.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic No Silicastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.